Hi, my name's Kevin Flynn, and this is my EGX Digital speech about soft launch on mobile. Going to be kind of covering everything from soft launch on up to global launch and a little bit past that. And hopefully share a little bit of the best practices and kind of what to look out for and what to expect and how to kind of work with the platforms a bit. So about me and why I feel a little bit qualified to talk about this. I'm co-founder of Mobile Game Partners and recently ChargeUp Games. I've been in the mobile gaming industry for about a little over a decade now. Almost all of that spent in mobile game publishing. For the past 7 years or so, I have worked as a consultant to help all sorts of companies launch their games. In the past 7 years, I've probably helped about 75 games launch. And with those 75 games, I've had probably about 150 front page features on Apple and Google, probably driven 500 million downloads from those. So have kind of gotten into the rhythm of how to work with the platforms and how to launch games and all that fun stuff. I started my career at a company called CrowdStar right when they were pivoting to mobile in about 2010. Spent some time there, joined a company called Kabam, led their mobile publishing arm, and did some M&A. And then I moved up to Seattle to join a company called Z2 Live. And then again, about 7 years ago, I branched off with my business partner, Adam Flanders, to start Mobile Game Partners, which again is kind of a boutique consulting shop, focusing on kind of platform relationships, business development, basically allowing developers to focus on making games and let us do all the boring business stuff. I also get yelled at if I don't mention this. I am one of the creators of Peanut Butter Jelly Time, which is the famous dancing banana. Long story short, I got drunk in college and created it, and it ended up being one of the first big viral hits. And for those wondering, I absolutely hate the song, and just hearing the first note kind of makes me cringe a bit. But while I've been at MGP, I've worked with companies as diverse as big companies like Gree, on down to smaller companies, 2-man shops to 2,000-man shops, and everything in between. So we really kind of like that. The process is by and large the same, no matter the size of the game or your team. And we're hoping to kind of give the advantages that a lot of the big players have to the smaller, more indie shops. So what I want to do in this presentation is give an overview of kind of how platform features have worked over the years. What does that look like today? The big differences between Google and Apple, because they do approach this very differently. And what are some of the best practices that we've learned along the way? So the history of featuring, it was increasingly effective from when it kind of started in 2009, and it really peaked around 2012, 2013. Back then in kind of the heyday of editor's choice, which has always kind of been the top ranked feature, it could drive 5 to 10 million downloads over a period of a few weeks. So it was truly at that time kind of a kingmaker. And even the lesser features, so the non-editor's choices, just some of the normal picks that they had, even those would do 500,000 to 1 million organic downloads. So at that time, it was incredibly valuable. Over time, though, it's kind of leveled off, and it's kind of sunk a little bit. One of the big problems is obviously since 2012, we've seen just an incredible increase in the amount of games that have been launched on these stores. And so one of the things that the platforms have really kind of struggled with is how do they, show the love to as many games as possible and still make it meaningful. So Apple was always kind of the best in town as far as featuring results until about 2017. So around that time, Google started tweaking things, and they actually came up with an interesting algorithm that would essentially, they would try to feature between 40 and 50 games on any given week. At first, it didn't really work that great until they actually, kept working at it and working on the algorithm. And they actually eventually kind of figured it out. And so what happens now is the first 5 games of any kind of Google feature are handpicked. And then everything past that is done by the algorithm. So if I like city battle games, it's more likely to show me those as, kind of picks 6 through 10. And so what actually ended up happening is Google's actually been able to feature more games more effectively. And so, today a standard feature on Google can still drive, 250 to 500,000 downloads. And then you obviously have kind of special features like the holiday features. Those can still today be in the millions, depending on, are they doing it on social media? Are they emailing it out? What have you? And obviously one of the other kind of big impacts that featuring has is it really helps with the organic traffic, and it helps with the ASO, the App Store optimization, which unfortunately is mostly a black hole where we don't know kind of what algorithms are doing what, but we do know that the featuring does help with that. And then what happens is, as you kind of rise up the charts, what you see is for each step up the chart, and we'll just say a step is like, top 500, top 100, top 50, top 20, top 10. For each one of those steps, the organic traffic actually roughly doubles. So people have always kind of been incentivized that if you are getting kind of that feature, and if you are kind of getting that big rush of organic traffic, to kind of supplement that with user acquisition to hopefully get you to that next level, and then you kind of get the benefit of that next big increase in organic traffic. So featuring today, looking at Apple right now, they have gone to a more daily featuring cadence. So instead of game of the week, now they have game of the day. Updates every single day. It's more curated. Kind of the approach they are going for is they look at the app stores today as kind of like people opening a newspaper every morning. And so they're trying to train that user behavior to get players to open that every single day and look at what's new. The actual featurings are far more curated than they used to be. There's usually a lot of verbiage or kind of things that the editors are pointing out. And so that's really kind of unique, is that they are really kind of doing almost a hand-selected process. And so now they have these game-specific tabs. So stuff like new games, what are we playing, Apple text specific. So we've actually had really great luck with that. So one of the things that we always recommend is looking ahead to figure out what are the platforms going to be trying to show off when your game is actually launched. And sometimes it's difficult, stuff like integrating AR. That's not super easy. But integrating stuff like metal could be easier. And then we've actually seen it where we integrated the tech that some other companies or a lot of other companies weren't really doing, and it ended up being featured for literally weeks and weeks on end because the platforms are trying to show off new technology. And so they want to show off the games that are implementing that and using that. So that's actually been a really, really good tip that we would recommend is looking forward to, what are the platforms going to be trying to show off? And if you can implement that in a way that makes sense. And that's not always possible, but where it is, we definitely kind of recommend doing that. Pre-orders are phenomenal. Both Apple and Google have some sort of system for players to register their interest in a game. And then when that game comes out, you get notified. And the benefit of that is you can really kind of take months and months of these pre-order registrations, and then you kind of get them all in one day, hopefully. And that ends up happening is you kind of spike up the charts. And as previously mentioned, if you spike up the charts, you're likely to kind of get that step up in organic traffic that can literally be geometric. Although, to be said, Apple has now had less reliance on the top charts than they used to. I mean, top charts used to be the end-all be-all, and people would spend irrationally, even if the spend was not profitable, simply to rise up those charts because the increase in organic traffic was profitable. And so again, instead of the editor's choice that they used to have, it's now game of the day. That all being said, what we have seen is, I guess, due to the a little bit of a dilution of now this kind of daily cadence, is the results have decreased fairly substantially. So again, we used to see millions of downloads from a Apple top feature. Today, it's probably around 50 to 100,000 downloads for the top featuring the game of the day. Obviously, this also depends if the game is free, if it's premium, if the download is large or small. All these things will impact kind of the results of the featuring. So when people always ask, well, how many downloads can we expect? The unfortunate but true answer is it depends. It depends on a ton of different factors. We have seen very, very similar games get very, very similar featuring results as far as where they're placed on the store, but the downloads end up being off by a factor of 10. Simply, maybe it's due to the art, or maybe it's due to the download size, or just simply that day. So unfortunately, there's a kind of a lot of guesswork and a lot of just luck of the draw sometimes. But what we always recommend is, getting that first featuring is literally just kind of the first step. And ideally, what you want is to get into a cadence with the stores where you're constantly kind of updating your game and making the updates meaningful so that the stores will kind of refeature you again and again. And you can really get into a cadence of every, as long as the updates are substantial and meaningful, getting that refeaturing every 16 weeks or so. So you kind of get that constant source of new and meaningful organic traffic. So who gets Game of the Day on Apple? We kind of did a 30 random days and took a look, and this is outside of holidays and other random events, to kind of see who is getting the love. Apple really likes IP. IP is a very strong correlation to whether you'll be featured or not. In recent years, they've also kind of started to push premium more, obviously with stuff like Apple Arcade. They're kind of wanting to make mobile games more of a premium, high-end experience than in the past. So what we're seeing is, if you have for example, premium IP, that's going to greatly increase your chances of being featured and getting that featuring. And then on free to play, it's even more substantial, where again, if you have this IP related free to play, you're far more likely. I think in this data that we saw, it was something like 80% of the free to play games that were being featured did have some sort of IP attached with them. So featuring on Google, again, like I mentioned, Google is really interesting for a few different reasons. One is they are really using their algorithm to their benefit, because it does allow them to kind of feature 40 to 50 games a week and still drive meaningful downloads to them. They also are interesting because they view new games and updated games as the same. So you can see here, it simply says new plus updated games. So with Apple, one of the concerns is always, well, is your game new or not? Because it's treated very, very differently. On Google, it really doesn't matter. And that's why, some people like to kind of launch on Google first, because it doesn't matter. They can launch earlier, but still get meaningful features down the line, just as long as they have a big, meaningful update. And again, the results are roughly the same. You can expect, whether it's new or updated or whatever, to kind of get roughly the same amount of organic downloads every time. The placement of features are, again, the first 5 or so are handpicked, and then everything after that is done by the algorithm. And luckily, like I said, the algorithm has become increasingly effective over time as they've kind of tweaked it and tuned it. And so it does allow them to feature more games with more downloads. Early access pre-registration, this is something we absolutely always recommend everyone doing for the previous reason. That's basically a free spike in downloads, assuming you get accepted, because this is something you have to apply for. Updates are incredibly important, especially on Google. Usually we like to recommend every 12 to 16 weeks, not any more often than that. We've worked with developers that were wanting us to talk to the platforms every month, and that's just too fast of a cadence. They have too many other games to work with, and eventually they'll kind of start ignoring you unless what you have is truly meaningful. So they look for are you listening to the players? Are you listening to feedback? Are you implementing new content? Basically, they want to know, number one, are you listening to your audience? And number two, are you going to continue to support the game in a meaningful way for years to come? And a lot of this is simply, them over time learning that players hate it when they get invested into a game and the developers kind of, decide they want to work on a new project instead. And so both the platforms will tell you very, very strongly that, if you have a game that's out there in the store that's launched and performing well, keep working at that game. Don't just go off and try to make a new game from scratch, because it's really hard. And I think a lot of times what we see is we see developers that had early success, or their first game was successful, thinking, oh, this is easy, I can do this again and again and again. And that's usually not the case. I mean, we've seen games that developers at the first game were huge hits, and then 4 or 5 tries later, they haven't really achieved that same level of success again. And so I think the lesson here to really kind of learn is that having a hit game is hard. It's really, really difficult. And if you have it, embrace that. Keep working with it, keep improving it. We have worked with games that, at launch, one game, for example, the LTV, I think at launch was like $1.50. Within a year, we have that LTV up to $8. And so that's almost a completely different game. Those metrics are monstrous increase, and it completely changes everything. Now you can really start to buy substantial amounts of traffic profitably, and it really changes the equation. And this developer that we're talking about actually at one point wanted to kind of leave that game and take their lessons and learnings and make a new game, and we had convinced them, no, let's keep working on this one. And it actually ended up working very, very well, and it grew into a substantial, well-known game, where they had wanted to kind of go off and do something new. So here are kind of some of the similarities and differences. Again, with Apple, it's way more heavily curated, while with Google, it's more curated with algorithms. Apple is heavy emphasis on story and art, kind of those unique gameplay experiences. Google is much more metrics driven. That being said, Apple has started to verify that the games are actually going to make money. So both platforms will usually ask for a lot of the similar metrics. So stuff like retention and LTV and ARPDAU and all that fun stuff, conversion rate. It's just a matter of how much emphasis and importance they put on that. The Apple editorial team is way smaller than Google's. They kind of like it that way. They kind of like to keep that exclusivity, that if you're dealing directly with the team, it's something to be kind of treasured. While with Google, they have a much larger, more kind of spread around the world team. Apple's has a much heavier emphasis on premium, while Google's more free to play. Apple's much more heavily skewed towards new games, while Google kind of looks at new games and substantial updates as being roughly the same. With Apple now, this is a huge change from even the past few years, you're going to get less downloads, but those downloads are going to monetize better. And Google's the exact opposite. You're also going to kind of get a little bit more downloads now, and a little bit less monetization. But these are kind of also always kind of changing. And so with Apple, you're also going to see updates based on the new features that you have added to the game. With Google, they really like to see the metric improvements. That's pretty much the number one way to get an update features, to show that you have these gains and metrics over time. Apple, they do these daily updates to the store, while Google still tries to do kind of a weekly cadence. So what are the platforms looking for? And keep in mind, this is something we always try to express, is that the platforms are absolutely inundated. I mean, they look at probably 1,000 games a week, and so their job is difficult. Each rep probably has to look at a couple hundred games every single week, and so the games are graded, and the stores kind of use a semi-similar grading method. It's just how they weight various things is a little bit differently, but they kind of look at a lot of the same things. So obviously gameplay quality is number one. Number two is uniqueness. So we always recommend when you're talking to the stores, really stressing, how you are different, unique, and better than the competition. Another thing that we had mentioned is that platform tech. So what do you have that's kind of specific to the platform that they might be trying to show off? That all kind of helps build your case. And again, over time, the weights will be different. So if Apple is unveiling some new grand tech, and you have that, it's going to be weighted much differently than maybe a year down the line. So those things kind of change constantly, and it's all behind the scenes. So we can just kind of make rough guesses as far as how important is this or how important is that. Marketing plan. They want to know that the game can survive on its own and thrive on its own. And really, the way they always say is like, look at featuring as just being icing on the cake. It shouldn't be your entire marketing go-to-market plan. And then what does your roadmap look like? So again, they want to stress that you are going to continue working on this game, continue improving it, and you have a vision for at least 6 months out of what you're going to do, how you're going to improve it, and just make it better. And again, the factors, the importance of them are changing all the time. So it's just try to ask yourself, when you're launching your game, what do you think the platforms are going to be trying to show off at that point in time? So how does this practice work? This is probably the number one source of confusion that we get. We have people all the time that ask us, hey, we have a game coming out next week. Can we get it featured? Usually the answer is absolutely not. This is a fairly long process. We generally recommend at least 12 weeks before your proposed launch date to have a pitch in with the app stores. So, a high level pitch, a few slides, and a sizzle trailer is perfect. And that's usually what we recommend. And that's, again, kind of 3 months before launch. 2 months before launch, we recommend kind of giving them the updated metrics and the roadmap as far as, here's what we're going to do at launch, and then here's what we're going to do a little bit past launch. And then 1 month out is the official presentation that you submit. Each platform kind of has a different sort of presentation that they like to see, and some different submission guidelines. But yeah, we usually recommend having that all submitted at least a month out, because a lot of times the platforms might kind of give you guidance. They might say, hey, the week you are trying to launch is really busy. We recommend waiting or trying to move it up if at all possible. So it's something that you want to give them as much time as humanly possible to kind of give you that guidance. And then the actual launch week, make sure you turn the game live. You would be shocked how many times we have seen people that have forgotten to do that. You want to do it usually 2 days before your proposed launch date, and it's kind of turn it live softly, because the platforms will check. They will usually check the day before the featuring is scheduled to make sure your game is up and launched and stable. And then just cross your fingers. I mean, I can't count the number of times where either we thought we were getting featured and didn't get featured, or vice versa. I mean, we've even had a couple of surprise, game of the weeks where we had almost no communication with the platforms, and then surprise, you got the top featuring. So it's really something that it's constantly changing and moving. And we always recommend, no matter what happens, no matter, if you got featured or not, just thank the platforms for their time. Again, they have a very difficult job, and I know from personal experience that they definitely get a lot of flack sometimes. And so just saying thank you for even taking the time goes a long way. And then 12 weeks or so past the launch date, that's when we usually recommend starting to pitch for an update feature. So again, you want to kind of show, what have you worked on? What have you improved? What metrics have changed? What player feedback have you been listening to? All that sort of stuff. So what to submit? And this is something, I've done probably 100 times. So I hope I have everything. I kind of went over our submission documents and tried to make sure, okay, do we have everything kind of encompassed here? So identifying information, your publisher name, your game title, your app ID, and whether it's free to play or not. Dates, so your submission date and then your desired launch date. Territories, the more the better. Usually they like worldwide games, like truly worldwide. That being said, they do usually make some sort of leeway for the Asian countries. So they usually kind of recognize that, especially China, it can be very, very difficult to do a true worldwide launch, including China, successfully. They recognize a lot of times it's probably better for most companies to go in with a partner in China, and then also Korea and Japan. So you can definitely get kind of exclusions. Just be very upfront about it. Say, hey, we're going to try to launch worldwide, but maybe not China. And they're usually okay with that. But again, the more countries you can launch in, the better. Content description, you want to have this all written out, the marketing text, the bullet points, and again, really try to stress what is the uniqueness, what is, kind of setting your game apart from everyone else. Languages. So this has kind of gone back and forth over the years. Probably 4 years ago, they were really, really stressing trying to do at least 12 different languages. Luckily, over time, they have also learned that sometimes it just doesn't make financial sense. There are some languages it's like you're not going to make up the costs for localization. That being said, obviously eFigs Plus is important. So English, French, German, Spanish, Russian, Italian. Italian's kind of an iffy one. Obviously, if you can say, hey, we think we have a chance to make some money here, that's great. But essentially, it's the same as the territories. The more, the better, as long as there is kind of a financial case there. Apple specific info. So, does it have Game Center? Does it have Metal? Does it have Replay, 3D, watch integration, what have you? Google, they like to know if it's simultaneously shipped or not. So Google, for a long time, we're kind of seen as like the second tier. And so what happened was a lot of games would launch on Apple first and then like 6 months later launch on Google. It's not as much of a problem today as, kind of cross-platform developments become easier and easier. But Google does actually like to check and make sure that you are going to simultaneously ship on both Apple and Google at the same time. Apple, oddly enough, has actually cared less about this over time, which is definitely a reversal from their previous stance. But again, all of this is kind of subject to change. So with Google, also the package ID, and does it have tablet optimization, and what devices are supported, which obviously, for Google, that can kind of be a issue because there's so many devices. Usually we try to recommend that you cover at least 90% of the major devices. So, the Pixels and the Samsungs and all that. The metrics, again, LTV, retention, conversion rate at a bare minimum. The more metrics, the better. And obviously, if you can show that the metrics are improving over time, that's incredibly powerful. And then market information. How much are you going to spend? Do you have a trailer? And what sort of marketing are you going to be using? Again, a lot of this is simply, you want to show that you are supporting this game, you have a plan to support it for a long time to come, and that you're capable of kind of managing this thing and growing it. The platforms have had times, where they would give games literally millions and millions of dollars of basically free advertising through featuring, and the games would actually go out of business within 6 months. And this is obviously bad for a few different reasons, but mainly it's for the platforms, it's bad for their audience, it's bad for the consumers, because they are investing time and money into these games, and the games just disappear, and that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the developers, for the players, or for the platforms. So they just want to really make sure that that's hopefully not going to happen. Obviously, things can happen, but they want to be as sure as possible. So after the submission, but before the launch, please keep a single point of contact with the platforms. Do not spam them on LinkedIn. Do not email, every person you can find. They absolutely hate that. They want you to have one contact point and keep with that contact point person. Again, we have literally seen features taken away because people are spamming everyone at the company. It's just kind of rude and bad practices. Changes, fixes. So Google will usually come back, I would say, probably 90 to 95% of times with requested changes. And some of the most popular ones are back button fixes, game services side, and then permissions. But Google will actually go through and usually give you like a bullet point of, hey, we need you to fix this, this, and this. And they do expect those to be fixed by the time the featuring rolls around. and maintain a 4-star rating. If you slip below 4 stars for whatever reason, they can and will pull the featuring, even mid featuring. I believe it's actually automated, where if it dips below 4 stars, it's automatically pulled back. And that's just because they don't want to feature something that is, for whatever reason, getting negative reviews. So we usually recommend, obviously making sure that the servers are ready to go and can handle the big jump in traffic. But also, making sure that you are responding to negative reviews. A lot of times it's simply good enough to show the players that you are listening, you are responding, and you're trying to fix things. So we usually recommend, with your kind of launch date, having at least some sort of team in place to respond to negative reviews. You should be getting some sort of art requests, usually, not all the time, but the art requests are usually a good sign that you're getting some sort of important featuring, and the art requests can be all sorts of things. So just be on the lookout for those. Again, if you don't get a response, that's not the end of the world. We have had many times where we got no response and got excellent featuring. And if you didn't get featured, again, I highly recommend still thanking them for their time. We have seen features pop up randomly. We have missed what we thought was the launch date, and then the next week it pops up. Again, they are super busy. They're trying to do the best they can usually, and try to service as many games as possible. So always thank them. It can really do no harm, and in some cases it can actually help you get a featuring down the line. So during the feature launch time, expect the unexpected. We've seen everything happen. We've seen literal servers catch on fire. We've seen rampant cheating cause the star ratings to decline. Again, like I said, maintain your rating, maintain it over 4 stars. It's important for 2 reasons. First, under 4 stars, and they can and will automatically pull the featuring. And usually the lower your star rating, the more expensive user acquisition becomes. Make sure that you're proactively responding to bug fixes. You can even kind of let the platforms know, hey, we saw this, and this pop up. We're expecting to fix them by this date. And then we usually recommend doing some sort of user acquisitioning campaign during the featuring time. Usually you can actually make your user acquisition dollars go much further if it's on the back of a featuring. So let's just say you start your featuring on a Thursday. You might want to start that UA by Friday or Saturday to really kind of maximize piggybacking off the featuring. So post-launch, we've actually always found that the platforms appreciate when we kind of let them know what happened during the featuring. Here's the results we got. Here's kind of the traffic we got. They just kind of appreciate having those data points. Again, always thank them for their time and kind of try to do that both at the same time. Thank them, and oh, by the way, here's kind of what we did. Here's the downloads we got, and then looking ahead, here's what we're going to change and fix, and we'd like to talk again in 12 or 16 weeks. For the update planning, listen to your players. That's probably the number one thing. Roadmap for major releases every 12 to 16 weeks or so. So a lot of times what a lot of people like to do, they like to kind of do weekly or bi-weekly updates. But the problem is that really kind of decreases from the impact, what we would call a major feature. So a lot of times you want to try to bunch up a lot of the most meaningful updates into as big a single update as possible to make it as meaningful as possible. And then, try to figure out, well, what are you going to add and why? Why are you adding this? Did you get player response? Are you trying to fix something? Are you trying to improve something? The platforms kind of really appreciate that sort of thinking. So in conclusion, launching games absolutely never, ever goes to plan. You can certainly, try, and that we highly recommend, doing it as organized as possible. But always expect something to go awry, whatever that might be. And it could be, both positive and negative. Featuring no longer makes or breaks games like it used to. I mean, it used to be, we had seen games that literally had done no user acquisition and still had made $50 million in a year just based off of featuring. That no longer happens. But featuring is still a tremendous source of high quality traffic. especially as user acquisition costs continue to go up. Looking forward with iOS 14, we're probably going to see user acquisition become even more difficult with the user tracking kind of going away. So I truly believe that featuring is going to be even more important looking ahead. And of course, it also helps build your ASO, which is a great source of kind of never-ending organic traffic. And it helps build those platform relationships because, if you can be proven to be a reliable developer for them, they're more likely to kind of think of you in the future. I mean, we've had many times where the platforms have contacted us going, hey, we have something coming up in 6 months, and we thought, this game might be a good fit. What do you think? Or, hey, we're thinking of debuting this new technology. Do you guys want to be involved in the beta? And all that's just kind of built off the relationships with the platforms. And yeah, if there's any questions or anything, let me know. I will attach my contact info, but it's kevin.flynn@chargeupgames.com. And yeah, looking forward to hearing feedback, and I hope this was useful for everyone. Thank you so much.